Hi, just to take up there where I left off on part two here. So we were on part five of the video, which is looking at a one seat by election. It's like, doing it step by step by step. So let's just look at the simplest case, which we're actually dealing with at the moment in Ireland. So a one seat by election is the simplest case. There is only one seat to fill. Suppose there are four candidates. Candidate on the first count, this is what happens. Candidate A receives, you're counting the first preferences of all the candidates. So we'll just make it four candidates rather than 17. You can imagine how difficult it is with that number of candidates, how slow the process is. But I think we can explain it using four, without oversimplifying it and without making it, too complicated using a huge number. So candidate A receives 3,800 first preferences. Suppose candidate B receives 3,100 first preferences on the first count. That's B. Candidate C receives 2,000 and candidate D receives 1,100 first preferences, and there's only four. So there are 10,000, say, valid votes, take the example we're taking, and we determined from the formula that the quota is 5,000 and 1. So that's 10,000 divided by the number of seats, which is 1 plus 1. So that's 2. And then you don't do any rounding, or you ignore fractions and you add 1 to get the quota. No candidate has reached the quota, as happened in both constituencies in Ireland on the first count yesterday. So the lowest candidate is eliminated. Candidate D votes are then examined and transferred according to the next available preferences on those ballot papers. The next available preference, now this is a point I think that's important. It's one of the most important points in the whole system. So a transferred vote does not simply go to the second preference if that candidate is already gone. So this is very interesting. So this shows you the value of actually doing the ranking. It goes to the next available continuing candidate in the race. So for example, suppose a voter marked 1 candidate D, 2 candidate B, and 3 candidate C. Now suppose candidate D is eliminated, but candidate B is just eliminated, say we'll say whatever count it is, but candidate B has previously been eliminated earlier. The vote does not stop at candidate B, so that vote still has value in the system if there is another ranked candidate further down that's still in the race. It skips candidate B and moves to candidate C, and that's the one that gets transferred upwards to the remaining candidates. So that's how that vote is handled in the single transferable vote system. So that's an important subtlety there that needs to be explained, I think. So it skips candidate B because that's already gone, but it moves to candidate C if you have candidate C, a mark for candidate C, provided candidate C is still in the race. So that's the single transfer. That's how it works. So if the earlier one is eliminated and you still have a lower choice that's still in the race, your vote is still transferable. So a transferred vote goes to the highest ranked candidate on the ballot who is still continuing to count. So that's very subtle, and it's beautiful, really, that subtlety, I think, myself. So the vote only becomes non-transferable if there is no further usable preferences. This is why third, fourth, fifth, or later preferences can still matter. Election without reaching the quota. So it keeps going up, and you see the way it goes up and up and up like this. It's fantastic, like climbing the stairs, ladders of the stairs. It's fantastic actually when you see the not just even the geometry, the arithmetic, as well as the kind of the visualization. You could put a kind of geometry on it as well. So or visualizing. So 7, election without reaching the quota. Sometimes a candidate in multi-seat constituencies in particular can be elected without reaching the quota. Well, not even in that. This sounds strange, but it can happen near the end of a count. Suppose the quota is 5,001. At the final stage, say this is in a one-seater constituency, candidate A has 4,900 votes and candidate B has 4,500 votes, and 600 votes have become non-transferable. And now when you add all those together, you see you get the 10,000. Candidate A cannot reach the quota. But if there are no more candidates left and no more capable of transferring, candidate A will still be elected. That's how it works. Why? Because candidate A is the leading Romanian candidate and no one else can overtake them. So you have the returning officer saying, since such and such didn't reach the quota and X, Y, and Z, we now deem so-and-so elected. So the quota is the normal route to the election, but the count must still fill the available seat. So seats, people can be elected without reaching the quota due to the issue of non-transferable votes in this system. And it's very clear, the rules are very clear. So multi-seat constituencies. So let's go to, we'll move up to the multi-seat constituencies, which we have many in Ireland. In a general election, most Irish constituents elect more than one TD. Constituents may have 3, 4 or 5 seats. This changes the quota because the number of seats is changed. So that the number that you divide the total valid votes by changes according to the number of seats in each constituency. For example, in a 5-seat constituency, say with 50,000 valid votes, the quota is 50,000 divided by 5 plus 1, which is 6, which gives 8,333 when fractions are removed. Then add 1. So the quota is 8,334. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. Hopefully it makes sense. It makes perfect sense to me now. And again, when it makes sense to me, it's easier. It's a way of So any candidate who reaches 8,334 votes is elected. Of course, if the quota, because that's the quota, so that automatically, once that happens to a candidate, they're deemed elected. So the quota is lower in a multi-seat constituency because several candidates can be elected. That's usually the case. So now let's look at the surplus votes. So this is very interesting mathematically. A surplus happens when a candidate gets more votes than they need. So you'd often have that maybe for, we'll say, a Taoiseach or a very well-known minister, people like this, or these kind of very well-known people, often they exceed the quota significantly on count one. So a surplus happens when a candidate gets more votes than they need. Suppose the quota is 8,334 and candidate A receives 10,334 votes, just for a simple example. So candidate A is elected but has 2,000 votes more than needed, just to round it off to 2,000. So that extra 2,000 is candidate A surplus. Now, it's very interesting how the surplus is divided and what formula is used to divide the surplus. And this is very interesting. This is the two that are interesting me are the way the votes are transferred when they eliminate it, and then you go to the next one, which is not a limit, and then this is the other thing that is very mathematically subtle. So interesting. So the surplus is not wasted. It is transferred to other candidates according to the next available preferences on the relevant ballot paper. So this is a very interesting concept, the transfer value, which a lot of people probably wouldn't understand. But again, let me try and explain it. So when a surplus is transferred, the ballots usually do not transfer at full value. Well, you see, you don't take 2,000 out of one box. So this is how it's done for fairness. It's very good. I think it's very clever. So only the surplus value transfers. This is where the concept of the transfer value comes in. If candidate A has 10,334 votes and a surplus of 2,000, the surplus is distributed proportionally among the next available preferences. So it's all very, it's very mathematical and very structured, very rigorous, very precise. The basic idea is the elected candidate keeps the quota and only the extra value moves on. So the extra value is the value of the 2,000. But how is that value worked out? That's the very interesting point. This prevents unfairness. Instead of randomly choosing some ballot papers to transfer and leaving others behind, the system transfer value at a fractional value. This is one of the the best, in my opinion, mathematical features of the PRSTV system. Elimination and surplus transfers. So the count moves through two main mechanisms. First, if a candidate is elected with more than the quota, their surplus may be transferred. The surplus is more important, it's ranked higher than the elimination. So if we have surpluses, that's the first thing that has to be distributed. Second, if no one reaches the quota and there is no surplus to transfer, the lowest continuing candidate is eliminated. Their votes then transfer to the next availing preferences as explained previously. This process continues until all seats are filled. Why transfer matters. PRSTV is not just about who comes first on the first count. A candidate may have a strong first preference vote but attracts few transfers. Another candidate may start behind but win because they're more transfers friendly. And this seems to be happening now in the Galway. It seems to be critical in a Galway by-election. the transfer-friendly candidate is more likely at the moment. If already, I haven't checked the latest, but it looks like we won't mention any names to be elected. If you're just looking at the last few counts, the way the lie of the land is certainly indicating a particular candidate to win, and the ladder. So he's going to move up the ladder and jump over, the person that appears to be, leading on the first count because of this system. This is why commentators often say the election will depend on transfers, or the transfers will, it's very, hard to call it, of course, until it's down to the wire, and if there's only 3 candidates left in the race, generally the tallies can call it on the transfers at that stage because there's so few left in the race. So transfers show which candidates are acceptable to voters whose first choice cannot be elected. Now, I suppose I could explain a little bit more there about the formula for the surplus, how the surplus are transferred, but that's important that be understood. But for the moment, why the system is valuable: PRSTV gives voters more expressive power than a simple one-choice ballot. A voter can say, this is my favourite candidate, but if they cannot win, this is my next choice. This means fewer votes are wasted. It also means that the final result can reflect a wide range of voter preferences. The system can seem complex, but the central idea is democratic and simple. Let the voter preference continue to matter for as long as possible, or as long as a voter chooses. Conclusion: Ireland's PRSTV system involves quotas, transfers, surpluses. I'm not happy with my explanation there of the transfer, how the surpluses are transferred, but that's just a mathematical calculation again, and it's done to so that the transfer is done in a fair and transparent way, and that's a mathematical calculation. That's important as well. I haven't done it here as well as I'd like, but I'll have to go back on that again. So I might just put it in a post there on the comments. So just how that's done. It's just a mathematical formula, and but it is important that people understand how the transfers, how the surplus are distributed. Again, it's proportionality, and it's applying a particular mathematical formula to that to the 2000 and to the second preferences of